In today's video for Path of Exile 2, I'm going to be going over an amazing build that you can put together very early on for your warrior class. I started out doing what probably everyone did. You've got your shield, you've got your one-handed mace, and I really didn't enjoy it. It was a little bit too slow paced for me, felt like I was playing Dark Souls in mud. So I'm going to show you how to switch it up, use a two-handed mace and do some absolutely amazing damage like you can see in the background on bosses here. You can start putting this together very early on, and currently I'm at level 22 and I'm absolutely having a blast. Warrior is probably not going to be the fastest clearer in the game, but he does hit like an absolute beast as long as you've got the right skills together and you're managing to put a few nice support gems on them. With this build you're going to start tearing through some of the toughest bosses in the game without having many troubles whatsoever. But remember, it is a little bit on the squishier side, at least at first, because you don't really have enough armour to kind of invest into. Later on, you're going to be in a much better state. You'll be able to absolutely decimate things and not worry quite as much about your health, but focusing on as much health you can put on your gear pieces and dishing out damage as much as possible definitely work better in my eyes than trying to roll away from situations. In fact, most times I found myself falling over if I was being defensive rather than offensive with this build. The first thing I'm going to do is show you the kind of skills we're going to be focusing on and how we're going to use them in a rotation. And to start off, we're going to go with Shockwave Totem. This thing is actually really nice as it gives you a little bit of time to kind of re-evaluate things. It aggroes some of the enemies, does a bit of AoE damage to them as well, dwindling down their health, and then you'll want to go into your Infernal Cry. Infernal Cry is going to mean you're able to put a lot more damage together when you're hitting them, and after you've used this 9 out of 10 times you're going to go with your Rolling Slam to take out multiple targets at once. If however you've got a single target and you just need to dwindle down one of the tougher enemies, or of course if it's going to be a boss, then instead you're going to want to focus on something that dishes out some really high burst damage, and for that we've definitely got a trick with Perfect Strike. This thing is an absolute nuke and very fun to see as it decimates enemies' health. For our long range you're going to go with Molten Blast, perfect when you've got a bit of distance between yourself and your enemies, and then lastly whenever the enemies you see are primed for a stun like they are here with the orb above their head, then you're going to finish him off with a Bone Shatter that's going to do some nice damage as well as another AoE, taking out multiple targets at once most times. So jumping over to our actual skills that we'll be using and the associated skill gems. First off we're going to have Mace Strike. This is going to be your standard hit. I do not use this anywhere near enough as I probably should do, but if you want to use it just for the fact of putting a little bit of bleed on them, I found that having that skill gem on can definitely help out because I had no other way of doing it. Most times I must admit I was preferring to go in with Rolling Slam in almost all situations, but having the support gem Lacerate on it can really help just to inflict bleeding on an enemy before you go in with some additional hits if they've got a high health bar. Over to one of my favourite skills for the warrior, and that's going to be Rolling Slam. This one is just good all round. It's quite good on single targets, it's really good on multi-targets, and it just does the job whenever you need to take enemies out. The great thing about it, it also does a heck of a lot of stun, because on its first slam it actually has a 50% more stun build up. The attack damage isn't quite as high, but then you're going to go in with your second slam, which is going to do a lot more damage overall. Both of these together make it a really nice skill for using in almost all situations. Over to the support gems, and I really liked Overpower on this one. This means that anytime you hit enemies, it's going to cause more stun to build up quickly. Fist of War is also an amazing choice because attacks with it every 6 seconds are going to give you an extra 20% damage, as well as I believe it's 20% extra area effect. Over to Earthquake, I do have this on my bar, but I must admit I don't use this as much as I probably should do. In fact, most times I tend to go with the Shock Totem. And then of course we have Bone Shatter. This one's really good if the enemies are already being primed with stun, because it's going to cause a heavy attack that also creates a shockwave, dealing a nice amount of damage to any enemies within the area. For the support gem, put this one on. Execute's really good for this because it deals 40% more damage when it hits against enemies that are on low life, and if you can afford it, because I didn't actually have enough strength for this one, but if you can, you're going to want to put on this one as well, Impact Shockwave. Over to our War Cry, and for this one we're going to be using Infernal Cry. This one is amazing. I try to use it pretty much whenever it's available, as long as there's a lot of enemies around me, as it's going to empower your next melee attack, giving you an extra 25% of damage as fire damage per 5 power of enemies within your range, up to 100%. This sounds really confusing, but what it actually means is the more enemies around you and the better ranks they are, the more damage you're going to dish out. As well as that, for your support, you're going to be going with Corrupting Cry. This is going to cause a little bit of damage over time effect, and even though it does mean you've got less of an area effect going on overall when you use the buff, instead it's going to deal additional damage because Corrupted Blood deals 25% of your strength as physical damage per second for 5 seconds. As well as that, Premeditation is a great one as well, because it's just going to allow you to get 15% more damage from your skill. Armor Breaker we're not investing heavily into at all at the moment. Most times you don't need this to tackle any of the tougher enemies with the build we're kind of going for, because we're going to be heading over to this one right here, which is our Perfect Strike. If you're after an absolute boss annihilator, this is going to be the way forward. So for your normal strike, it's going to convert 40% of your physical damage to fire damage. However, you're after that perfect strike, which means you have to hit it when I believe the whole of your character, or at least the hammer, goes exactly golden. Then you're going to want to let go and you're going to hit that perfect strike, which, as you can see here, does 612% damage. It is ridiculous when you get this on point, and even if you miss it a few times, most times you're still dishing out crazy damage, enough to take out most of the enemies and elites in the game. It's also going to convert 80% of physical damage to fire damage and plus 14 to your melee strike range. One thing you definitely want on it is going to be your window of opportunity. This is going to make it hit in that sweet spot even harder, but when you do, you'll definitely know about it because the skill is going to deal 50% more damage. And Fire Infusion, supported attacks gain 25% of damage dealt as extra fire damage overall. Over to our Shockwave Totem, and this one's just great. Like I said earlier, you're going to be using it for a little bit of aggro and just taking out some of the enemy's health overall with that Shockwave going on. And of course you'll want to put Jagged Ground on it because now you're going to be able to get a build up of extra damage anytime that Shockwave's hitting the ground. Molten Blast is going to be your longer range one, so your medium to longer range if you want to dwindle down the health of enemies, and this one's going to put a bit of fire damage on them as well as take a bit off of them whenever you're hitting them with it. For the support, you're going to want Magnified Effect. This is going to give you 40% more area effect going on. And finally, our actual buff, which is going to be from our Spirit Gem, and that's going to be the Herald of Ash. Now, whilst active, enemies you sufficiently overkill with attacks will cause an explosion that ignites nearby enemies based on the overkill damage dealt. Just means you're going to do a little bit of dwindling damage to everyone around you, and a lot of times with this build, when you're using your Rolling Slam, you'll see this come about very often. Overkill is when you do excess damage from how much the enemy's health is to how much you're actually doing with your hammer attacks, and this can really help to dwindle down everything in a big AoE. Over to our stats, and obviously these are going to be terrible if you're still leveling and you've not managed to get yourself any really good piece of gear, but don't worry, this is a beginner build, so just try and focus on a little bit of your life as high as possible. Grabbing it on piece of gear works absolutely amazing. If you can get a little bit of energy shield, that can actually help quite a bit, but it's by no means essential on this warrior class at the moment. Obviously you're going to want enough mana just to make sure you're using your skills and such, but you've usually got enough to cover this without even needing to worry about it. And in 30 Spirit you can grab that from the very first act by looking for your upgrade boss. If I remember correctly, it's by beating the boss over at Freythorn. Then after that, the only thing you've really got to worry about is make sure you've got enough dexterity, intelligence and strength to actually equip whatever you need to. Focused mainly on strength as much as possible, and then grab yourself some armor, but by this point in the game it doesn't really matter as much as it will do later on when you're able to stack armor much more efficiently. Other than that, every single thing you can, you're going to want to chuck into damage by putting it into your skill tree and by getting a very hard hitting weapon. Speaking of which, this is the one we've got currently. It's still a blue, so again it's definitely not the be all and end all, but I've had this for around about 5 levels now and it's still doing the job really nicely. The main thing you want to look for, you want as much higher physical damage as possible, and then if you can, try and socket a rune into it that can actually increase it as well. For this one I had the Rune of Iron, giving it 20% increased physical damage again. Luckily I was also able to use a augmentation and it gave me +1 to level of all of my melee skills. For the ring, we've got a little bit of maximum mana going on, a little bit to our maximum chaos, which means nothing to us, but we did want it for the maximum life, and +6 to intelligence. Also it's got a couple of resists on it that help negate a little bit of damage. For the gloves, and we're using these ones because they give us 3 physical damage to attacks, 5 extra to our dexterity just in case we need it for putting on another piece of gear, and one thing I'll definitely try and get hold of with your build if possible, gain a certain amount of life per enemy killed can really help you out when you're trying to tackle a whole bunch of enemies at once. Remember, you'll be rolling slam very often, hopefully taking out mobs and clearing everything as you go, so being able to get hold of this kind of negates how much damage you're taking, because again, you are a little bit on the squishier side until later on when you can get more armor about yourself. For the belt, this one is not the best whatsoever, but it does give us a little bit of extra mana recovery from flasks. I would much prefer it to be health, but 35 to maximum health, and life regeneration is also quite nice in the build. For the mantle, we've got this with armor 52. Try to stack a lot more than that. This is not the best for armor, unfortunately, but it does give us a little bit of an energy shield, 43 to our maximum life, and a little bit of stun threshold, which is really good if you don't want to be knocked about when you're trying to perform your moves. Over to the head, and anything that can give you extra armor here is really nice, and this one also gives us a little bit of mana and a little bit of fire resist. One quick change later, because I realised I had nothing equipped in this slot and a few pieces of gear in the wrong places that really weren't for my build, but you're going to want an amulet, not like this one, if you can find one, because you may not actually have one early game. These things are probably one of the harder things to get hold of, and they're more expensive in the shops, but if you can, try and look for something that has either strength on it or max life. Both of those are going to work out absolutely ideal. For our other ring, try to get something with a nice bit of resist. That'll help you in areas that has got quite a lot of damage. Fire resist always works nicely, and anything with physical damage to attacks is also going to be perfect. Don't worry about chaos damage, that's not going to help you at all. Accuracy helps a little bit later on, but probably nothing to worry about at the moment. And this one's got 12 dexterity, you'd definitely want that on strength instead if it was going to be an ideal roll. For the boots, these are low level, but they hit pretty much everything I was after. A little bit of increased movement speed, 38 to armor, maximum health, and 10% increase to rarity of items found. It also came with 25 to stun threshold, pretty much hit everything you want, and they're just a really nice bit of overall kit for helping out round your build off. And for your charm, until you can get a really nice one, just find one that you think will help you out with a little bit of your resist. For example, the ruby one like here, there's quite a lot of fire damage going on around the early levels, so 25% fire resistance can definitely help you. Of course, if you're in a different area and you're finding you're attacked by different elements, then try and pick one that's going to help with that instead. For your mana flask, honestly, this doesn't matter too much at this point. Just make sure you've got one that recovers as much as is actually possible so you can keep topped up at all times. And exactly the same for your life flask. Make sure it gives you as much you can recover over time, but this one definitely doesn't give you the best, because what you're going to want to do, if I head over to my stash like just here, you're going to want one that's going to give you a certain gain to it. This one gives 22% chance to gain a charge when you defeat an enemy. I believe these are probably the best one, but if it's not these, it will be the other ones that regenerate a little bit of your life flasks whenever it's down to a duration of time. So they'll be stacking up whenever you're playing, just moving around, and it'll just be down to a time limit when they're actually going to replenish. Now, if I go over our skill tree quick, the passives you're going to want to be looking at is going to be all into damage. Damage, 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 that's your way forward. And I'm going to zoom out just so you can see exactly what we've done. And we've kind of made our way a beeline in order to pick up all the nodes that's going to allow us to do a lot of damage very, very fast and easy. The ones we picked up is going to be increased melee damage here. Then making our way all the way around, picking up as much damage as possible. A little bit more here. This one is absolutely amazing. 40% increased melee damage against heavy stunned enemies is definitely something you want to take advantage of. Then we're going to go into increased melee damage here, a little bit more to our strength, more strength, and down from here we're going to be aiming to go all the way over to pick up everything we can with our two-handed weapons. These nodes I would highly recommend picking up as soon as you possibly can, because they just dish out so much extra damage, and of course they help you with a lot of things such as your increased stun build up. Back up from here, and we're going to go up again, and this time we're going to go into our war cry, but also it's going to give you a lot of empowered attack damage, so this tree's one you're definitely going to want to look at as well. Later on, once you've got a few more levels in your build, you're going to want to backtrack, and then you're going to want to peel off and make sure you pick up these nodes as well. In order to get sturdy metal, take advantage of it when you've got a little bit more armor about yourself. Back up this way, you're going to have a whole bunch of armor nodes here. You're going to want to pick these up whenever possible, because they're going to really help you to stay alive and just make your life a whole bunch easier on some of those tougher encounters later on. Right, hopefully that's helped a few of you guys and girls out. There's going to be a load more content away from me, as I'm really enjoying this game so far. As always, for all things gaming, take care. I'll see you on the next day.